It's essay. Oh, here we go. Now we're live. I was a little early. Um, Hi, everybody, and welcome to the August essay reads conversation that's happening in September because we're on top of things. And we're going to be discussing the book Wild by Cheryl Strayed. But before we get started, I have a special guest who wants to tell us a little bit about the books that he likes. Come here.
I like Minecraft.
Okay, come here and tell them that. Don't suddenly get camera shy. Everybody, this is my son, Aiden, and he is very excited to show you that he really likes books about Minecraft. I don't know if you can see that, but there are all these books about Minecraft right here.
4.
He's very excited about the book fair coming up at school, where he will get to purchase the other 2 books, he hopes, because he has 2 of them, of course.
I will get them.
He will get them, he says. So anyways, he wanted to say hi and talk about how much he enjoys books as well. All right.
I don't want to go yet.
Well, okay, we're going to talk about the book. Are you just going to sit here?
Sure.
Okay. So anyways, Lisa and I are going to be, thanks. Lisa and I are going to be talking about the book Wild, as I mentioned. Why don't we, first of all, Lisa, why don't you talk about how much you love this book?
I could spend the whole hour talking about this, but first and foremost, Kristen, that is some excellent parenting right there. To have a child who's excited about a book fair, that is excellent parenting. Good job, Aiden, by the way. I may have to start reading some of your book recommendations. I should also point out that I'm well prepared. I have the book and what helped me get through the book, not for the reasons you may think. Not because I didn't like it because it was a slog, but because at some instances this book was highly emotional and highly provocative for me. There's a lot going on in this book, a lot of self-discovery, a lot of deep reflection, a lot of humor, a lot of some dangerous moments, some exciting moments, some really sad moments. Cheryl packs a lot of feelings into this book. I think that's what I love most about it. For those who know me well, and those who may not know me well but follow me on Twitter, I love authenticity, I love vulnerability, I love opportunities to share more of the messy process rather than the finished product. And what I love about Cheryl is she doesn't just talk about, so I hiked this trail and it was awesome and I'm awesome, the end, and how everything went so well. She really opens herself up here and talks about what led her to be on the trail, which is just as confronting and vulnerable and authentic as her journey. So I'm absolutely in love with this book. I was saying to Kristen right before we went online, the Toronto International Film Festival is happening as we speak, and Reese Witherspoon is in my city at the premiere, and I think Cheryl's in my city too, maybe. I haven't been able to go and stare her down yet and shove the book in her face and be like, you changed my life. But the film is premiering, I believe, here in Toronto, which is really exciting. I'm really looking forward to, and Kristen and I will talk about that a bit later, about how the movie will or will not translate from the book. It's always interesting how the images in your head translate to the images on screen, as I'm sure many of our book-loving friends know. But I absolutely love this book. I am so impressed by Cheryl and her authenticity and her vulnerability, as well as her writing style. It's a heavy book, but she writes in a really light way, if that makes sense. It's almost like you're sitting with her with a glass of wine and having a conversation, even though she's dropping some serious knowledge and some serious reflection on you. So in case it wasn't obvious, 2 thumbs up, very many gold stars. Love, 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 love this book.
I think Lisa's saying she liked it.
It's all right. It's okay.
This is actually not the first book by Cheryl I had read. I read, I think it's Tiny Beautiful Things, which is a bunch of her advice columns. She wrote at this Dear Sugar, I think it was, advice column, which I also highly recommend that book. It makes me want to be an advice columnist. Much like this one makes me want to go hike a trail somewhere in the wilderness by myself. I can't recommend this enough. And I emailed Lisa and I'm like, go pick this book up right now. You must read this book. So I'm glad that she enjoyed it as much as I did. I think there was a whole lot for us to get out of it, even beyond just the fact that it's incredibly brave of her to go hike this trail by herself, which, again, like reading it, it makes me want to go do that at some point, which I won't because I've got this little squirt here. So it'll be several years before I can do something like that. But okay. But anyways, I do think that there's just so much more in this book than just her hiking. It's about her life. It's about her mom. It's about her family and her ex-husband and all of that wrapped into one. So in case you didn't get this from us, we think you should read this book.
And what I love, and this is a nice segue, what Kristen was saying, and something we've talked a little bit about when I talked about authenticity and vulnerability, she was so brave, and we're going to use that term a lot, I think, when we talk about Cheryl and talk about this book, how brave she was to hike the trail, but it also really confronted, if you will, my understanding of the word bravery and what that actually means and what that could look like. Because her journey, her actual physical journey on the trail is incredibly brave. A young woman alone in the wilderness for miles at a time, encountering strangers and all sorts of weird weather, and of course many other situations that would happen with someone who is not, well trained in long distance trail hiking. So that's all very brave. But the way she talks about her life is actually also really, really brave. So it's interesting that bravery doesn't have to be this huge fanfare, big act. Bravery can also just be her confronting her innermost emotional and personal demons. It can be being by her mother's side when she was dying of cancer, when other siblings may not have wanted to be there. It's brave in the way she talks about her father and how her father treated her and how she was able to live through what her father did or didn't do. So there's a lot of instances where bravery doesn't necessarily roar, but bravery is still there. That bravery can be found in the smallest moments, as well as walking the Pacific Coast Trail, I think is really, really neat.
And I think for me, the piece of that I really identified with is she constantly has two paths in front of her. You know, there's the one of least resistance, the escape, or there's this one that she can go through that's forward, that is going to be incredibly hard and difficult, and she knows this, and she keeps choosing forward. Mm-hmm. And that's something that, for me, resounded very strongly, because I'm not somebody who just, runs away from stuff. I tend to charge forward, sometimes stupidly, and she does that in the book as well. And so that really meant a lot to read that and see how that really works, for somebody else.
Mm-hmm. There's a quote that I pulled because Kristen and I are really big on quotes from these books, and as we talked about in our last Essay Reads adventure, we send each other back and forth these long lists of quotes that really spoke to us. And one that I like that touches on this idea of bravery, she says, "Perhaps by now I've come far enough that I have had the guts to be afraid." Which I thought, it took me a moment to read that and read it again and understand what she was saying, and that notion that you actually need to be courageous enough to be afraid, which is completely counter to how we often talk about bravery and how we often talk about being afraid. We often talk about bravery being the absence of fear, but as my good friend Mark Twain says, it's really doing the thing anyway, even in the face of fear. So the fact that she says she had the guts to be afraid, I think is a great lesson. Of course, I'm channeling my inner Brene Brown, as I do every single time I talk about anything related to authenticity. But having the guts to be afraid, I think, is a really cool lesson to take from Cheryl's journey, that it is okay to be afraid, and even more importantly, it's okay to do the thing that you're afraid of and admit that you are afraid. So it speaks very highly to something Kristen and I often talk a lot about. If you know us, we're very authentic and very open, but having the guts to be afraid is a new one for me. Being afraid is uncomfortable for me, and probably for a lot of people, no matter how big or small it is, whether it's the Pacific Coast Trail or family dynamics or anything else that's going on in my life. So having the guts to be afraid, I think, is an interesting lesson, and I'm happy that she phrased it that way.
Absolutely. I'd like to talk a little bit, Lisa pulled this quote too, and I think it was probably the one that resounded with me the most. or maybe it's not even a quote. Hold on, let me go back and through it. Yes. One of the things that happens in this book is she goes out on this trail, and she's got all the gear that the people at REI have told her to get. She's got the boots. She's got this monster backpack. She's got, a little portable stove. She's got an ice pick. She's got everything. She doesn't know how to use half the stuff she has. And everything that she gets out there, and it several times leading up, she's like, oh, it says I should have done a trial run, and I meant to do it here, and I meant to do it here, but I never got around to it. And so her trial run for a lot of this gear is actually on the trail. Mm-hmm. And as you're reading it, you're cringing because you're thinking, how stupid can you be? Like, come on, this tells, like everybody tells you should be doing trial runs with this. You should even the least, experienced hiker knows that you should be doing some hiking before just going out and hiking this trail all summer. And Lisa and I had talked a little bit about this, and it's in comparison to our field. And for me, it's this idea that, all that equipment that she has is kind of like going to graduate school in higher ed, and you're getting all these tools that you can use. But without that experience, you don't really know how to use them. And so I really thought that was a great comparison to our field.
Yeah, it's neat thinking about all that sort of trial by fire that we talk about. And we may use that term somewhat colloquially or facetiously. I really just want to say colloquially and facetiously, like I knew what they meant and use them in a sentence. But we use that whole idea of trial by fire. We just sort of throw that term around a lot in student affairs and in our profession. And I think it's neat that, as Kristen was mentioning, we can see Cheryl do the same thing in a very salient, physical way. There's tons of great metaphors in here. So the backpack she's wearing can be the weight of the knowledge, if you will. I mean, textbooks weigh a lot, but also just the metaphorical, if you will, or mental knowledge that you gain in graduate school, or that you know just from networking with other professionals, going to conferences. And we carry all of that weight, but just as Kristen said, do we know how to use the stuff that's in our metaphorical backpack? I mean, how many times have we talked about our toolkit or our backpack or our satchel or whatever it is we choose to carry our stuff in? But do we know what's in there? Do we know how to use it? I love when she was getting the lesson, I think it was the ice pick, or something she was using in case she needed to scale a glacier or at least just travel across some really dense, icy territory on the trail. And she was getting a lesson from a gentleman at a campsite. This is this part of the instrument. This is how you use this part. This is what you do when it doesn't work. And she was completely flabbergasted. It was one of those things where I knew I would need it, so I threw it into the bag, and I've been carrying it around, and it's heavy as heck. But now I might need to use it, and I don't know what to do with it. So I need to reach out for help. So there's lots of great lessons in here about asking for help, but also great lessons in being a little more intentional and thinking about what do we carry in our backpacks? Why are they there? Why is this journey so laborious for us? Because we're carrying so much. Do we need it? Why do we need it? When do we need it? And I guess somewhat cheesy, but how can we have people help carry the load too? We don't have to do that alone like she did.
Right. Yeah, again, there's so many metaphors that this, you can call from this. Mm-hmm. But I really, so much of it for me was there's nothing that replaces experience. Mm-hmm. And that's really what a lot of this comes down to. It isn't until she's been on the trail for, just another total awesome thought that came to me. What I love is she's got a little bit of the imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. Like, until she's on the trail for like a month, she keeps referring to herself as this person that's walking the PCT, but not a hiker, not a real trail expert or anything, despite the fact that she's out there by herself doing this day after day after day. And she's making choices that, the most experienced hikers are having to make with all this knowledge, and she's making it with much less knowledge, but she's making the choices. Mm-hmm. She's moving ahead. And so it's not until she actually, has people who aren't hiking come up to her and start asking her questions that she really starts listening to herself and hearing herself say, oh yeah, it's this, and this is what I'm doing, and this is how I'm doing it. And she's like, I suddenly realized how much I knew about this.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny hearing people say to her the same sort of dialogue that's going on in her own head. And that's something that I've been confronted with many, many times. Every time I dive into something new, I always hear myself say, you're crazy, you can't do this, this is weird, that's nuts, how could you do that? So I tell myself that, and I'm really good at believing it when I tell myself that, and I'm sure Cheryl was too. But then, just as Kristen said, she starts talking to other people who aren't doing this crazy thing, and they say to her, you're crazy, why would you do that, that's so strange, aren't you scared? And it's funny because when she talks back to those people, she doesn't sound like she's coming from the same place that's in her own head. Bear with me here, this makes sense in my head, I'm going to work through this, external processing. But it's neat because when she responds to them, she comes from a place of, well, no, I know what I'm doing. I may be scared, but I'm working on it. Yeah, this is not that much of a big deal. So she doesn't act or speak in the same way that she's thinking. It almost takes someone, as Kristen mentioned, to confront her with, oh, this is actually really scary. So when someone else confronts you with it, you're like, no, it's not a big deal. But when you're listening to yourself, all of a sudden it's a big deal. So it was almost that sort of drive-by therapy lesson, if you will, where people had to say to her, yeah, this actually is a big deal, and you're doing it. For her to say, yeah, it's actually a big deal, and I am doing it. So she's learning, as Kristen said, to get out of that imposter syndrome and to feel like she is actually hiking the trail and is meant to be there and isn't perfect at it and is certainly having her challenges. And there are many challenges in here, some that are a bit cringeworthy. I've appreciated my toenails so much more since reading this book. But she confronts all of them, and there's a reserve of confidence and courage that seems to come out, that she seems to understand and seek out, I think, as the trail continues. So what a fantastic metaphor for anything. I mean, this is sort of the journey, if you will, the physical journey that is so metaphorical for all sorts of other mental and emotional and personal, professional journeys that we take. Love it.
Yeah. Yeah. I just had a thought, and it totally just left me. Hold on, let me look at the quotes again and see what it was.
Okay. While you're doing that, I just want to say thank you to Becca for watching. Thanks, Becca!
Yeah, thank you, Becca. We have a watcher. One of the things that really struck me about this is the reason she goes out on the trail in the first place is kind of to figure out what the heck she's doing with her life. She's had a lot of tragedy going on in her life. She's had a lot of grief. Her mom passes away. And that's kind of where she starts the book, where she starts her journey, is with her mom's death. And there's all this stuff that happens as a result of that she's dealing with. And she gets out on the trail, and while she's hiking, she barely even thinks about it. Mm-hmm. Because she can't. She's putting one foot in front of the other at that point. And it's all about survival. And there's something in that just really resonated with me. And I think some of that is just, in those times where we get so busy, for lack of a better word. I know that's a bad word to use sometimes, but when we're truly busy, when we're truly working as hard as we can, sometimes that's all we can do is put one foot in front of the other to get through that time. But to be able every once in a while to take that step back and look at the bigger picture and see that. And every once in a while she takes a step back and looks around her and realizes how beautiful everything is and what she's done so far and what that has meant to her. Mm-hmm. And so it's those glimpses of reflection that I really appreciated in the book as well.
And it's also neat, the idea of physical exertion or physical activity, and I'm trying to be careful with my words here because it's not taking the place of mental anguish or mental suffering, which she has a lot of, as Kristen mm-hmm. mentioned, especially early on in the book. You really feel how deeply she is feeling the loss and the tragedy and some of the poor choices that she made and the weight of those. But the physical exertion and activity, again, doesn't take the place of that mental anguish, but it gives it a realness and a space for it to be in. And Kristen and I have talked about this before. I've certainly talked about this many times. I've written about it, what things like anxiety and deep, hard, not so fantastic feelings can do to you physically, and also what mental activity can do when physical activity is part of that. So that's why I work out, in part for many reasons, partly so I can eat, partly so I can drink wine, but also what it does for me mentally. And this, again, was sort of the extreme example for me. If I was undergoing the same sort of stress that Cheryl was undergoing, I might not have chosen to hike the Pacific Coast Trail, but I might have chosen an extra workout or two. And just to see that physical exertion and physical activity can make you forget, in part, but also has an interesting way of centering that suffering, because you're pouring a lot of that mental anguish and those feelings into that one foot in front of the other. Yes, you may not see or, I guess, consciously feel or think about certain things. There were certainly moments on the trail where she was more concerned about not falling off the trail, or more concerned about her toenails. I keep going back to the toenails. It's weird. Poor thing.
That was disgusting.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that. I'll just say toenails, go see the movie. I'm sure they'll put it in there. Or read the book. But, not that I'm really selling it now. Sorry. But it's interesting that her physical exertion can not take the place, but can be a channel for a lot of that mental. There's the word. It's channeling that mental energy. So she can feel physical pain and physical exertion, but that mental energy is still there and almost driving it, and she's working it out in a really kinesthetic sort of way. So the two are very much linked. I've always thought of mind and body being linked that way. Again, when I work out, I usually go for runs when there's something on my mind and I need to clear it out. I usually lift weights when I'm just having a bad day and need to feel like I've accomplished something and done something. And I kind of resonated with Cheryl that way too, because she almost felt like she was so out of control. And I've had these conversations with other people who work out as well. When you feel so out of control that there's nothing that you can grasp onto, you can at least hold on to that weight. You can at least put your boots on, you can at least put your running shoes on and walk one foot in front of the other. And it almost felt to me that she didn't really talk about this. I'm going to jump into her head a little bit. But I feel like that was part of it for her, to feel like there was something she could control. She can do this. There's also the argument that maybe she was looking for a way to suffer in some respects, because a lot of her suffering she had brought on herself. So who knows? Again, I'm wildly extrapolating. But at least it feels like you can do something. So I've had really bad days where at least I've said, I've gone to the gym. I've picked up something heavy and put it back down a few times. And I've gone on the treadmill. So at least I've controlled something. I've accomplished something. I know that I am competent enough to be able to do something. So I think that's part of it too. And again, just as Kristen said, it gives me another reason to want to put on some hiking boots and go walk. I mean, maybe when, Aiden's a little bit older, Kristen, you and I could just go out, we'll strap some GoPros to us, and we'll just do essay reads from the trail. I think that's possible.
There we go.
Make it some funding somewhere. We'll do an essay chat campaign for it.
Well, you mentioned the movie, and I thought we could spend a few minutes talking about at least some of my concerns, I think some of your concerns, and how this is going to translate into a movie. So much of this is her internal monologue, and really what she's thinking about while she's on the trail, and the pain that she's feeling, and some of it is flashbacks to her life before, and maybe the flashbacks will work really well. But I guess I wonder a little bit how much, I mean, it's one thing to read a woman's thoughts, it's another to see somebody act those out on the screen. And in a way, I think it'll have to be very carefully done. Reese Witherspoon is, of course, playing Cheryl in the movie. So she does not look quite as glamorous as usual, at least from the previews. So that's at least promising, I guess. But I do just wonder, like, how do you... I expect a lot of voiceovers, which could have the potential to be a little hokey at times. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you. Hokey's probably the word that was going through my head, too. Something like this where really the premise of the book is they walk a lot, or she walks a lot. I mean, there are certain scenarios in the book and little caveats and things that happen. She meets certain people, and there are certain almost little sub-stories within the story that they could certainly treat in a dramatic way. But for me, the foundation of the book, where the lessons come from, where the real drama comes from, is in those moments where she's by herself. Like, a lot of the lessons, a lot of her reflections, a lot of her comments, her self-discovery, those are much more interesting to me. And yes, as I said, there are little moments, like there are certain people that she meets and little side stories that are interesting that I'd be curious to see how they translate those, because I have images in my head of what they've looked like. But as Kristen mentioned, a lot of it, she's walking and she's having a lot of inner monologue and inner dialogue. And how they would treat those, I don't know. I mean, I guess they could do voiceovers. She could talk about it with someone afterward. I think while voiceovers would be hokey, I think they would at least be truer to the style of the book than her, so I had this great walk, and let me tell you about what happened, friend over coffee later in the movie. So I think it would be better if there was more of that, I guess, voiceover piece. But it's going to be weird because, like I said, her interactions with other people aren't, like, from the grand scheme of things, they're interesting, and I laughed a little at some of them, and the people she met were engaging and interesting, but that wasn't the meat of the story. Like, I could just listen to Cheryl talk for an hour. Like, maybe they just need to put Cheryl on a screen for 2 hours and just have her hold the book and read it.
Have her talk, yeah.
And have her talk. Because there's only so many times Reese Witherspoon can sit down and complain that her boots are too small, or, you know, struggle to put her backpack on, which, again, were interesting and intriguing ways to tell the story. But and again, this is just me and my very uninformed opinion of Reese Witherspoon. She's a good actress, but I feel like she needs, like, dialogue and to be engaged. And this is a lot of, like, it's going to be read on her face and read in her actions. It's almost very interpretive, if you will, kind of interpretive dance-ish, but obviously way better than I could ever do it. So, I don't know. I think the voiceovers would work. I just hope it's not, you know, voiceovers with really dramatic music playing in the background.
Exactly.
And flashbacks. Like, they don't need to sell the drama and the intensity of it because it's already there.
It's already there.
Yeah. I'm already freaking out. You don't need to put the, you know, the dramatic music in the background.
Right, right.
Yeah. I don't know.
So, yeah, some hesitations, but
what about
probably
the flashbacks part?
It.
What about the flashbacks part? What did you think about that? Like, her, like, they have to talk about what happened in her past. Like, how do you think they're going to do that?
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I bet they show it. I bet they reenact it. I got to think that they would, because those are some of the most interesting parts of the book, for sure. Finding out about what has led her to be on this journey is definitely, I think, pretty fascinating stuff. She could have written a book just about that.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, I'll be curious to see how it is. I'm sure I'll go see it.
Oh yeah. Like I was saying to Kristen right before we started recording, with the film festival being in town, and I know Reese Witherspoon is somewhere in downtown Toronto, and I live just outside of downtown Toronto, so I've been on Facebook trying to figure out where she might be. I almost feel like if I couldn't get Cheryl, I'm pretty sure we could have gotten Reese Witherspoon. It was going to be one or the other. So Reese, tell us about how you were playing Cheryl and what you thought. Like, I'm pretty sure she would have joined us. She's just busy, something about a premiere and a red carpet. But I am very curious to see what this would look like. I almost feel like I want to take the book in with me and try to, like, have a little flashlight and read along and see what they put in, and more importantly, what they didn't put in.
Right.
Because there's, again, a lot of really interesting, deep reflection that happens, but how do you translate that on a screen so people will pay attention for a couple of hours? So, yeah, very, very excited to see how they will translate this. Cheryl seems to like it from what I've seen, from what she's talked about on Facebook and Twitter, which is a good sign.
Good.
But I almost wonder what their driving lesson is for the movie versus what she thinks the driving lesson is from the book, and if they're the same. I don't know.
I believe their driving lesson for the movie is that they hope it makes money.
Possibly. We're just a little bit cynical sometimes about book-to-movie adaptations.
Sorry. That's me just being snarky.
Nah, it's okay. Kristen, snarky? No.
I know, it's hard to believe.
I'm looking back at our quotes and wondering if there's more that we wanted to talk about. That was really cool. Lots of stuff about fear, again. Like, she talks so much about fear. But she does it in a way, it's not a panicky, oh my goodness, everything's going crazy fear. There's a very intriguing calmness to her fear. And she
she chooses when she's going to be afraid and when she's not.
Yes, yeah. Well, there was this whole inner dialogue that she had, especially at the beginning, like, one foot in front of the other. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. And how many times do we do that in slightly less dangerous situations, like right before a conference presentation or right before hitting send on an email? How many times we have to tell ourselves that we're not afraid in those very controlled situations? And she's saying this when she's, surrounded by wild animals and really unforgiving terrain. But what a neat lesson in self-talk, and what we choose to tell ourselves and what we choose to believe in what we tell ourselves. Just as Kristen was talking about before, she had the imposter syndrome on the one hand, but an imposter who was not afraid of what she was doing. That's an interesting dynamic for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the whole aspect around fear. I mean, like, she talks about it to begin with, and the times that she's afraid, it's almost humorous in a way. Like, the things that she is afraid of and the things that she's not. Like, she gets to a certain point where she finally recognizes that she has every reason to be afraid because she doesn't have enough water to get her through to her next stop, right? And that's probably, there's a lot of times before that where she's like, she'll hear stuff and she's afraid of that, or, just different little things that happen and she's afraid. But then there's a freaking bear on the trail and she just yells at it and she chooses not to be afraid of that. I'm like, There's a bear, woman. How are you not afraid of that? You should be afraid of that.
Yep. No, I'm picturing you yelling at the book. So you were doing what I was doing, like, what? Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's true.
I mean, it was just, it's incredible sometimes where she just chooses not to be, and to a certain extent, you're like, she can't be, because if she allows herself to be afraid and is paralyzed with fear, she can't keep moving forward. So she has to choose not to be afraid.
Yeah, and she has to keep moving forward, which again I find so interesting. Like, this book really is such the archetype for any kind of journey that you may be on, personally, professionally, the combination of the two. But again, that whole lesson of, like Kristen so eloquently said, you have to keep moving forward. Like, you have no choice. You can't be afraid in that moment. So she's able to tell herself. I don't think it's tricking herself. It really is telling herself that she's not afraid, because it's not tricking herself and then secretly being afraid, but then acting differently. She really is
able, actively choosing.
Yeah, and is able to pull from somewhere, which is so incredible. This reserve, this courageous reserve to say, no, I'm not, and I'm going to keep moving forward. Like, how many instances could she have just said, that's it? And she talks about that in the book. Like, I could have just stolen the keys from this guy's truck and just kept driving, and that would have been it. But she was so committed to it, and every time she made some small accomplishment, took another step even. It wasn't a big accomplishment like, I made it to this mile marker, but I took 2 more steps, and now I'm going to take 2 more. So again, lots of great metaphors for any other professional journey or personal journey where, it's a really freaking long trail. But she was able to celebrate those little milestones and not be afraid to keep moving, knowing fundamentally that she would encounter more and bigger and scarier obstacles along the way. So that type of courage is really interesting. The not tricking yourself into being not afraid, but actually believing in yourself, even if you don't think you are, but believing in this moment that I am, which is probably fundamentally my other big lesson, in the moment. Really having no choice but to live in that moment. Yes, be thinking about the future, where's my water, where am I going to camp, but very much throughout the journey and throughout the book, she is fundamentally 1,000% in the moment. And I have no idea how to do that. I want to learn how to do that. I want to be better at doing that. I
think we all do.
Yeah, I want to be where I am and be all there. And she's able to do that. Not instantaneously, but very quickly. And again, her survival depends on it. But having that lesson and being present was fascinating. I want to do that. I want to learn how to be that way, just to be in that moment, even if you are in an uncomfortable moment, but to be in it and then to figure it out from there. Very cool.
Right. Yeah. So, in case you guys didn't get the message, read Wild, please, and then tell us what you think about it. You can all keep chatting on the Essay Reads hashtag. As long as you all want to chat about it, we're happy to chat.
Yeah. I think there's probably one way we can sort of segue into the next half of our conversation, which is really about other books that we're reading, because as much as we're doing this about 50 times throughout the conversation, I also have a stack of other books, and I know Kristen, of course, shockingly, has a stack of other books. But to segue into that, what did you think about her ripping pages out of the books that she was carrying and burning them after she read them? Right? Okay, so this is where Kristen and I may have a little rant, a little moment about this. We love Cheryl, except maybe for this little part. So she brings books with her on the trail, and I think actually in the book she lists the other books, yes. But the title of the list is Books Burned on the PCT. So she had a bunch of books with her, and she was ripping pages out for weight purposes as she read them and throwing them in her fire. And every time that happened, I couldn't. Yeah.
There's something almost cathartic, I think, about being able to do that. I get that. Excuse me.
Bless you.
But there was, sorry, my dog is
it's all right.
here with all the crazies, so hang on.
The dogs are just as excited about this book as we are.
Okay. That way you didn't have to hear me yelling. But it was this idea of burning the books that really just, it's that whole book burning, all the baggage that goes with that just drove me a little bit crazy.
Yeah. I get the cathartic part for sure, and I get the practical part. Like, the books are heavy. Like, I know that if I wanted to hike the PCT, my biggest challenge would be, Lisa, you have room for maybe one book. And you can't bring your e-reader because there's no place to charge it. So you need maybe one book. So I get the practical purpose, but just even physically picturing her, like, I'm going to pretend to do it right now, and it scares me just to pretend to do it, but to actually rip pages out of a book when, to me, the book is so much more than just the words on the page. The story is so meaningful and impactful and a part of me now. And the fact that she, ripped them out and threw them in the fire did irk me and perhaps some of our fellow book lovers a little bit. But it could also just be really cathartic, and it could also be a lesson in, I have taken what I need from this book and I've chosen to give it away somehow. I mean, yes, you could have just actually given it away to somebody else, but there's no one around on the trail. So this was her way, I guess, of releasing some of that knowledge. She does talk about one book that she refuses to burn and carries with her. And it's like, thank you, good job, Cheryl. You've redeemed yourself a little bit. But the whole idea of burning books, I think, just as Kristen mentioned, burning books in general is something Kristen and I are very anti, in case you haven't noticed. So that was interesting, too, that she brought literature with her, and that played such an important role on her hike, but then had to get rid of it somehow. So love and loss, and just really a commentary on how emotionally attached, not just physically attached, but emotionally attached we get to books. So interesting that she would do that. Makes sense. We love you, Cheryl, regardless, but an interesting commentary, again, on how attached we get to the written word, I guess.
Ooh, Becca just asked a really good question.
All right, go for it.
If you could only bring one book on a very long journey, what would you choose? Ouch. That's a tough one.
Becca, you might need to tweet your answer to that, too, just to play fair. I feel like the Jeopardy theme needs to be playing in the background while we discuss this, because it's really awkward while I try and go through the motions of figuring that out.
Yeah, I might have to think about that one. Let's keep going.
Yeah.
We're thinking about it, Becca.
And Becca, the fact that you've rendered us more or less speeches is probably a big enough accomplishment for a resume, I would think. I would think that's a bullet point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really good question, Becca. And if anybody else is on the Essay Reads channel right now or back channel, please share what you would bring if you only could bring one book on the PCT on the trail. What book would you bring and why? If you can fit it into 140 characters. That's an excellent question. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I have to forget, but I love all of them.
I know.
Well, Kristen, what else are you reading these days? Let's see if we can maybe cull a short list. What else are you reading these days?
Okay, so I've been reading kind of slow because I'm reading. So have I ever shared with you my thing about lists, reading lists, and how much I love having a list of books to read, right? So I don't know if you've heard of this, but the 1001 books you must read before you die.
Cool.
When my friend gave that to me, I had read something like 80 of them. And so I then made it a mission to read more of them than that, obviously. I don't know if I'll ever read all of them, but I think I'm now up to like 200 something. And so I've been reading the Rabbit Angstrom books, which are by John Updike. And I've read the first one and the second one. And they're a little dense. They're good. I mean, it's incredible writing. Almost all the books in this list are incredible writing. There's some that I really love the story as well as the writing. There's some that I love the story more than the writing. And there's many that I love the writing more than I love the story. And so this is one of those where it's this story of like everyman, and you get the feeling that the author both adores his main character and really, really just hates him because of what he puts him through, right? You know, and you're like, I got to keep reading because I got to see if this poor guy is going to make it, like, ultimately. I mean, so it's just a fascinating kind of look, and they're set, each book is set 10 years apart. There's 4 of them total. And so the first one is set in late 1950s. Next one is late 1960s. Next one is late 1970s, and then finally 1980s. And so I'm in the 70s right now. And so it's kind of fascinating look not just at the character but at the culture in America at the time and what that looks like. So I've been reading those. As well as I also threw in an Amy Bloom book. I don't know if you've ever read anything by Amy Bloom. If not, you should go pick up something by her, like right now. She is one of my favorite authors, and probably my biggest pet peeve with finishing her books is that it's going to be so long before another one comes out. She really takes time writing her books, which I love, but they are, like, I'm always sad to finish one because I'm like, oh, it's going to be forever till I get to read another one of her books. Because they're just beautiful.
Well, that's a sign of a well-done book and a really good author.
Absolutely.
So Becca, I'm looking back at, because Becca's question is sticking in my head. So last year I did the 52 and 52 book challenge. So in 2013 I read a book about a week-ish for the whole year and managed to complete my challenge. And I'm looking back at my Pinterest board at some of those books, because some of those were really, really insightful and really stuck with me. And the one that's actually sticking with me right now that is a contender for the one I would take with me is Chris Hadfield's An Astronaut's Guide to Life. So Chris Hadfield, proud Canadian, first Canadian astronaut, I believe, up on the Mir space station, or I might be horribly butchering that, but he's a very famous Canadian astronaut. His guide to life is amazing. It is practical, it is funny, it is deeply reflective. He really forces you to think about success and failure in very different ways. He forces you to think about mistakes in very different ways. So if I was hiking the PCT and knowing me, making a lot of mistakes and doing a lot of things wrong and encountering a lot of challenges, I think having Chris Hadfield's experience alongside me would be really helpful. And there's a story to it as well as some practical advice. So he talks about himself. He talks in a very dialogue type of writing style. So it'd be like having him there with me, which would be really cool, as well as learning from him along the way. I'm concerned because it's a thicker book. It's upstairs right now, but it's a thicker hardcover book, so probably not the most practical book to take with me, but definitely to have a fellow Canadian who has been up in space with me, I think would help in my journey on level ground. So that's my attempt at an answer. I'm sure I'll change it 50 million times, but that's probably the first book I think I would go to carry with me if I was only allowed one. I do have a stack actually with me too, which is bad.
So tell us about your stack.
So I, of course, have a few different books on the go, particularly because I live right across the street from a library, which is as dangerous as it is exciting. I can see it right out of my window. It's closed right now, which is sad, but probably for the best. So there are a few books that I'm reading. I've talked about this genre many times in essay reads before. I love mystery novels. I'm particularly attracted to mystery novels by British authors set in British towns, British places. I need to go to England yesterday. I just love the way these authors describe things, describe characters, describe places. For some reason, it's a different way of thinking and seeing places than American or Canadian or other authors write. I don't know what it is. The prose to me is more beautiful. The way they talk about places is much more interesting. So just a caveat to say I love anything set in England or the surrounding areas. So one of the books I have on the go right now, new author, Morag Joss. It's called Fruitful Bodies. It's a series. Very similar to a lot of the other books that I read. But this is different because the emphasis is not on the murder investigation. The emphasis is on the detective's on-again, off-again lover and her challenges personally and professionally. She is a professional cellist, so a musician, and what's going on in her life and how their lives intersect. So the murder mystery is there, but you see it from how it impacts their relationship as opposed to the other way around, which is kind of a neat and different writing style. And as you can tell, I only got it like a day or two ago, and I'm plowing through it because it's one of those books where I really want to know what happened. I really want to know how it ends. Ian Rankin is also one of my favorite authors, and this is a collection of short stories. So you get to the punch in the gut quicker, I guess, with the short stories than you would with the novel. Again, some murder mysteries or just general mysteries. But every short story, I was reading this on a long drive a little while ago, and my poor driver, because all he saw was me going, oh, what? Every time, because every short story is just so impactful and surprising, which is really cool. I also get a lot of my book recommendations on Twitter, so when I follow people, especially if they've got something about reading in their bio, I usually ask them a question about what they're reading. If it's an academic, I ask them what they're reading that informs their research. So I was tweeting back and forth with a researcher, and he recommended the Year Without Pants, which is actually about WordPress.com and the future of work. Haven't gotten to this one yet.
Totally gonna have to read that.
Yeah, I mean the title alone, doesn't that sound like a fun year? Year Without Pants? Hello. But excited to learn more about their workplace philosophy, their working philosophy, and about WordPress.com. Considering I use WordPress for my own personal site, always neat to see the, I guess, the philosophy behind the company. And I like that this doesn't seem to be about look how great we are as a company and look at all the cool things we've done, but rather where work is going. Krista did use that dreaded word busy, and I think they talk about that a little bit in here, just what busy means and what productivity means. Yeah, and then my final book, which I've been delving into a little bit, but just thought it was cute. So I go to the library a lot and just browse, which is dangerous because I only work out now to lift more and heavier books. So this one, it's called The Novel Cure, the A to Z of literary remedies, and it's actually written like a doctor's manual. So you can go through, for example, there's an entry in here, loss of faith, and it gives you book suggestions of what to read if you've lost faith. Falling head over heels in love, there's some book suggestions. Fatherhood, some book suggestions. Even things like the flu, some book suggestions for the flu. I'm sure there are lots of caveats about how it won't help you physically feel better. Falling out with your best friend, the 10 best novels for 40-somethings. So it really does read like an almanac, like a doctor's almanac or a doctor's textbook, but the remedies are different books. So this may end up being something I actually invest in and keep with me once I have a chance to go through it a little bit more. But I thought it was a really neat idea. I'm going to go through and see if there are any maladies in here that match my own, which I'm sure there are. There's even, here's a good one. I just opened it. Resistance to Change. Book recommendations for resistance to change.
Excellent.
That might be something I need to go through. Yeah. Sorry, paying attention.
Need to pass that around.
Need to pass that. Just send that out to everybody.
Well, great. I was looking up while you were talking. So I've read several mysteries by either British or Scottish or Irish authors, and so I have a whole list of recommendations for you because I also happen to like that genre.
There's something about the way they write. I don't know what it is, but even they can describe the most horrid place. Like they'll talk about how much it's raining and it's dark and it's damp, and
That sounds
it's just
amazing.
yeah, it's they make it like it's not a fun place to be, and you're like, I need to go there right now. I need to see this rain. I need to see the one street lamp. I need to see how dark it is. I need to smell how bad it smells. I just need to be there.
Right.
They can dig into a place just as easily as they can dig into a person. And I think that's what I like most about that genre, which is really cool. So if you don't hear from me, I've just gotten on a plane. And I'm just wandering around with my books and trying to match the places.
Exactly. Well, great.
I think there was another, just really quickly, Ashley said the book she would take would be The Great Gatsby, because I know that I could read it again and again and never tire of it. Cool. That's a good suggestion. Call. Yeah.
I'm still thinking about it. That's a hard one. One that kind of ranks up there is The Time Traveler's Wife.
Mm-hmm.
For a couple reasons. One, I love the story. I think it's beautifully written, and I love the story. But I have this thing about time travel that really just screws with my head a lot, and so that would give me endless time to really think about how time travel would work.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be it. I don't know.
I'd come up with how to do time travel.
Right. If you ask me tomorrow, I'll have a different one.
Well, that's the thing. If you ask me again tomorrow, I'll have a different one, too. Like, I think it would be cheating if I gave Becca the link to all of my 52 and 52 books and said, well, for every week or day I'm on the trail, it would be that one.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
Good question, though, Becca. Thank you. Thank you for getting us thinking.
I'm still going to think about that, probably.
Yeah, I'm sure Kristen and I will be tweeting up a storm later tonight or tomorrow. No, this one. Maybe this one.
But changed my mind. This one.
But we'd love to hear from you. So if there are other books that you think you would carry with you, if you could only carry one book with you on a long hike or other journey, please share them with us. If nothing else, we'd love more reading suggestions, as always.
Absolutely.
So please share those with us. We'd love to hear what you think you would consider to be the book you need to take with you, because we want to learn about it too, and we want to read it too.
Yep. And we're still looking at books for our September book for essay reads, so we'll let you know what that is soon, very soon, since we're already in September. And we'll let you know also when we'll be chatting about that.
Mm-hmm. So tweet us your book suggestions. As Kristen said, we're looking for a September book, but we will also be taking suggestions through to the remainder of 2014. And I can't believe I just said the remainder of 2014 because there isn't much of that left, which is terrifying. I know, we do this every month, but we always say, I can't believe it's insert month here.
Right.
But I really can't believe it's September and 2014. In the end of 2014. So when Kristen gets this whole time travel thing figured out, we're going to go back a couple months and start again just to get in a few more books, if
Absolutely.
nothing else. But thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for reading along with us. We will, of course, be checking the hashtag and hanging out and reading with all of you, but we will see you next month, or this month, later this month.
Or next month. We're not sure yet.
Month. We haven't decided.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Night.